Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Sam from Historic Travels and welcome to another video. And as always, before we get started today, I'd just like to take a quick moment to welcome all my new subs and to thank everybody who's been leaving me comments and messages down below. Thank you all so much, I really appreciate it. And if you would like to take a couple extra steps to help support the channel a little bit more, there's a merch store and a Patreon for this channel in the links below. Thank you all so much for all your support. Oh, and in case you missed it, there is some brand new merch on my merch store. So if you would like to go and check that out, please go click the link in the description below. Oh, and guys, just so you know, we are at the final call for the contest that I did with Iceco, where they're giving away a mini fridge. So if you would like to be entered to win, or have a chance to win the Iceco mini fridge, please go to my Iceco review video, link in the description, and leave a comment there. And hey, if you would like to purchase anything on the Iceco website, please use the promo code HISTORIC and you will get 12% off your order. Alright, so now it's time to continue the complete timeline story of the RMS Lusitania. Now in episode 1, if you remember, we left off at the point where the head of the Cunard Line was meeting with the British government to see if he could get a loan from them in order to help finance the construction of 2 brand new revolutionary ocean liners. These ships would become known as the Lusitania and the Mauretania if the head of the Cunard Line could get funding for these vessels. If he could not succeed in getting funding from the British government to help build these ships, then the Lusitania would never come to be.
However, this turned out to not be an issue. When the head of the Cunard Line, a man by the name of George Burns, met with the British government to discuss the situation, the British government agreed to give the Cunard Line a loan of £2.6 million in June of 1903 to help finance the construction of 2 brand new revolutionary ocean liners. However, in order for the Cunard Line to get this loan from the government, the British government had very strict technical specifications that they wanted to have implemented into their new ships in order for the Cunard Line to get a loan from them. The reason the British government gave the Cunard Line strict technical specifications that these new vessels had to meet in order to get a loan from them was because that in the event that war should break out, the British government wanted to be able to use these vessels for military purposes. More specifically, they wanted to be able to use these new ships as armed merchant cruisers. The technical specifications that the British government wanted for these new ships are of the following. Number 1, the ships had to have a double bottom. Number 2, the new ships also had to be divided into watertight subdivisions for safety. Number 3, and this is a pretty unique concept, the British government wanted the ship's coal bunkers to be positioned along the outer hull. That way, in case of a hull breach, the coal bunker itself could act as a watertight bulkhead, protecting the interior sections of the ship from flooding.
Now, while in theory, the whole idea of putting a ship's coal bunker along the outer hull does seem like a good way to protect the interior sections of a ship from flooding, in practical standpoint, I'm not really sure how well this would work out because, well, I'll tell you my reasons here in a second. You see, traditionally, the way ships usually handle coal bunkers is that they don't position them along the ship's hull. They actually have the coal bunkers cut through the ship's interiors along each of the ship's individual bulkheads. So let's compare the Lusitania's design with another ship like the Titanic. The way the Titanic handled its coal bunkers was that the Titanic was divided up into 16 individual watertight bulkheads, and then the coal bunkers for the Titanic went along each of the Titanic's bulkheads. So if you were in one of the Titanic's engine rooms, or boiler room I should say, and you looked at the Titanic's watertight bulkhead in there, you wouldn't see the bulkhead. You would see the coal bunker in front of the watertight bulkhead. And then if you looked at the Titanic's hull, you would just see the hull. However, it was flipped with the Lusitania. You see, the way the Lusitania handled it was, if you looked at the Lusitania's watertight bulkhead, then you would just see the bulkhead. However, if you looked at the Lusitania's hull from the interior section, then you wouldn't see the hull, you would see a coal bunker in front of the hull. Now, I spoke to Mike over at the Ocean Liner Designs channel about this whole idea, and he also told me that while the idea is interesting and in theoretical terms, it seems like it might work, in practical use, he wasn't so sure, because in the event of a hull breach, trying to shut a coal bunker door and make that small section of the ship watertight, well, that really wasn't the easiest thing to do, mostly because of the pressure involved of trying to shut a coal bunker door with tons and tons of seawater blasting through an opening. So, as I said, in terms of theoretical, it's an interesting idea, but in terms of practical use at the time, I'm not really sure how well that whole thing would have worked out.
There were 3 more requirements that the British government wanted to have implemented on these brand new ships. Number 1, they wanted the ships to have reinforced decks, so if the ships had to have guns mounted to them, it would be simple to do so. They also required that these ships remain under British ownership. And the last and probably the most challenging technical requirement that the British government wanted on these ships was they wanted these ships to be able to maintain a speed of at least 24.5 knots.
Now, while this speed requirement doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal at first, it was a bigger deal than what you might realize, because it's easy to build a relatively small ocean liner and fit it with a bigger engine and have this ship be able to maintain a higher rate of speed. However, this wasn't the vision Cunard Line had for this whole new class of liner. They wanted these ships to not only be some of the fastest in the world, but they also wanted these ships to be one of the largest, if not the largest ship ever built. They also wanted these ships to be unmatched in style and luxury. They wanted the public to marvel at these new ships. So this speed requirement was definitely going to be an issue for the Cunard Line. But we'll talk more about that in a minute. For now, the only thing you need to know is that the Cunard Line got the funding it needed from the British government to begin construction on these ships, and Cunard Line's vision for this whole new class of liner was finally coming to life.
Now, when they were first planning out the design of these new ships, the original plan was that these ships would have 3 funnels. However, after learning about the speed requirements needed by the British government, the Cunard Line decided to add a 4th funnel so they could put more boilers into the ship, and that way they could accommodate a bigger and more powerful engine. This is why, at the end, these brand new ships would end up being 4-funnel ocean liners. Throughout the rest of 1903 and into the early months of 1904, the final plans for these ships was completed, minus one very important detail that we'll talk about in a minute. But it was also decided around this time what these 2 new ships would be called. The first ship to be built would be called the Lusitania, and then its sister ship that would be built soon after would be called the Mauretania.
Once the Cunard Line was ready to begin construction on these 2 brand new ships, they were anxious for work to begin as quickly as possible. But you see, the thing is, the Cunard Line didn't want work to just proceed on one ship. They wanted work to proceed on both ships at exactly the same time. They didn't want construction on the Lusitania to be a few months further along than that on the Mauretania. They wanted both of these ships to be built at exactly the same time. That way, both of these ships could enter service at exactly the same time. By doing this, the Cunard Line thought they would be in a better position to fight against IMM and stop them from monopolizing the North Atlantic trade route. So, what the Cunard Line ended up doing was, they had both the Lusitania and Mauretania be built at exactly the same time. However, they had them both being built in 2 separate shipyards. That way, they wouldn't have to wait around for one shipyard to do some work on the Lusitania before they began work on the Mauretania.
And honestly, this plan worked out pretty well for the Cunard Line. The keel for the Lusitania was laid down on August 17, 1904 at a shipyard called John Brown & Co. in Scotland, and its sister ship Mauretania had her keel laid down just 1 day later on August 18, 1904 at a shipyard called John Richardson and Swan Hunter in Northumberland, England.
Now, even though work had already begun on both the Lusitania and the Mauretania, there was one very crucial design element that had yet to be decided on both of these ships. And because this design element hadn't been decided yet, this would severely limit how much work could be done on both the Lusitania and the Mauretania. You see, if you were in the shipyards where these ships were being built, you would notice that the process of building these ships was going pretty differently than what you would traditionally see on other ships built during this time period. The shipyard workers were prioritizing building the front sections of the ship instead of the back sections of the ship. This was because the Cunard Line, even at this late stage in the game, had yet to decide what type of engines to put in both the Lusitania and the Mauretania. Remember how earlier in this video I said that there was one design element that had yet to be decided on these ships? Well, what type of engine they were going to use was exactly what they had not yet decided on yet. And until they decided on what type of engine to use on both of these ships, the process of building both of these vessels would be severely limited.
The reason the Cunard Line had yet to decide what type of engine to use in these new ships was due to the speed requirement imposed on the Cunard Line by the British government. Initially, the Cunard Line planned to use the traditional reciprocating engine in both the Lusitania and the Mauretania. However, they weren't sure that this engine would be able to meet the speed requirements imposed on them by the British government due to how large the Lusitania and Mauretania were planned to be. However, the Cunard Line did have an engine in mind that may, just may, be able to help the Lusitania and Mauretania reach the speed requirements needed by the British government. This engine was called the Parson steam turbine, and it was a revolutionary, brand new engine. and even though this engine had proven successful in early tests, it had never been implemented on a vessel as big as the Lusitania and Mauretania, so the Cunard Line wasn't sure if they should put these engines in their new ships or experiment with another means to get these ships to reach the speed requirements needed by the British government. The first vessel to ever use the steam turbine engine was a small ship called the Turbinia. This vessel was basically a proof of concept ship. The only purpose of this vessel was to test the steam turbine. The vessel entered service in the year 1894, and although the engine did work, it didn't reach anywhere near the speeds that those who built the ship expected. So they went back to the drawing board, made some design changes, and added a few more propellers to the ship, giving this small vessel a grand total of 9 propellers. Yes, you heard me right, this small ship had 9 propellers on it. Once they made these changes, they did another test with the vessel in the year 1897, and this ship reached speeds of up to 34.5 knots, or roughly 40 miles per hour. This was an unheard of speed at the time period, and this ship was, at the time, the fastest ship in the world. So honestly, this vessel did prove the potential of the steam turbine.
Now, even though the initial test results of the steam turbine engine appeared to be promising, it wasn't all perfect with this new engine. Even though it appeared that the steam turbine was more powerful than the traditional reciprocating engine, there were a few drawbacks. Number one, they noticed that this engine used a lot, and I mean a lot more fuel than the traditional reciprocating engine, so that was one problem. There were also issues with these engines vibrating a lot, which could make traveling on any ship with these engines a bit uncomfortable. And there was also an issue with these engines didn't always perform as expected. You see, there were quite a few ships that used the steam turbine from the time period of the Turbinia up to the time period that the Lusitania and Mauretania were being built. And honestly, the results of the steam turbine were kind of a mixed bag. So that's why the Cunard Line was initially skeptical of using this engine in their new ships.
Probably the most famous account of the steam turbine engine not performing as expected had to do with a ship called the RMS Victorian. This was the very first transatlantic ocean liner to be equipped with the steam turbine engine, and this vessel was nowhere near as big as the Lusitania and Mauretania were going to be. During the initial sea trials of the Victorian, which happened in December of 1904, the ship failed to reach the 17-knot speed requirement as stipulated in her contract. So as a result of this, the Cunard Line lost faith in the steam turbine engine, and until further tests could be run on the engine, they temporarily decided to halt construction of the Lusitania and Mauretania.
Now, initially everyone, including those of the Cunard Line, thought that the main reason that the Victorian failed to reach her projected speed was due to some unforeseen problem with the turbine engine. So this is the main reason why they decided to halt work on the Lusitania and Mauretania, because up until this point, the Cunard Line was almost certain that they were going to use this engine in their new ships. However, upon further examination, it was discovered that the real reason the Victorian failed to reach her projected speeds was due to some design problem with the ship itself and not the engine. However, I don't blame the Cunard Line for halting work on the Lusitania and Mauretania, because think about how this must look from their perspective. You've got this brand new, untested engine, and this engine, while it has potential, has a lot of problems. You know, it uses a lot more fuel, it has vibration issues, and then on top of that, it doesn't seem like it can consistently make a ship run at a projected speed. So honestly, I can't blame the Cunard Line for being skeptical of this engine. However, even with all this, they weren't ready to throw in the towel with this engine just yet, because in 1905, they had it within their means to perform an experiment with this engine. And this experiment would prove once and for all if the Cunard Line was going to use the turbine in their new ships or switch back to a more conventional engine. However, we can talk more about that next time. I think this is a good place to pause the Lusitania timeline series for now. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure you leave it a like, be sure to subscribe, and hey guys, be sure you go and check out my new merch on my merch store. As I said, link in the description. And also don't forget to go and sign up for the Iceco contest. I will be selecting a winner for that on Sunday. Link for that in the description as well. All right, everybody. Well, hey, you all stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good evening, everybody.
Special thanks to our captain level Patreon supporters, Dakota Charboniu, Greg Gallick, and Callum Whaley. Thank you all so much for all the support.